like the sun burn through the night.
Could you turn to Hosea chapter 3?
Just 3.
3 verse 1, starting there through to, let's see. Through 4:6. 3:1 through 4:6. And just before you start, just a reminder, I'm going to ask you when he's done reading for your observations, insights, themes you may notice, and maybe even questions before we jump into some of the setting and background of Hosea. Okay.
The Lord said to me, "Go show your love to your wife again, though she is loved by another and is an adulteress. Love her as the Lord loves the Israelites, though they turn to other gods and love the sacred raisin cakes." So I bought her for 15 shekels of silver and about a homer and a lethek of barley. Then I told her, "You are to live with me many days. You must not be a prostitute or intimate with any man. I will live with you. For the Israelites will live many days without king or prince, without sacrifice or sacred stones, without ephod or idol. Afterward, the Israelites will return and seek the Lord their God and David their king. They will come trembling to the Lord and to his blessings in the last days. Hear the word of the Lord, you Israelites, because the Lord has a charge to bring against you who live in the land. There is no faithfulness, no love, no acknowledgement of God in the land. There is only cursing, lying, and murder, stealing and adultery. They break all bounds, and the bloodshed follows bloodshed. Because of this the land mourns, and all who live in it waste away. The beasts of the field and the birds of the air and the fish of the sea are dying. But let no man bring a charge, let no man accuse another, for your people are like those who bring charges against a priest. You stumble day and night, and the prophets stumble with you. So I will destroy your mother. My people are destroyed from a lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I also reject you as my priests. Because you have ignored the law of your God, I will also ignore your children.
Thank you, Patrick. And that's a fitting place to stop when looking at the first half of Hosea there, with that kind of a thought there at the end. So, before we jump in, what'd you catch there? Something you'd like to share? Or questions?
I would have been angry. As Hosea.
Mm-hmm.
I think I would have been really angry at God. If I hadn't been broken by this point, I would have been really upset with him.
Mm-hmm.
Just for everything that was happening between my wife and I.
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess it just really shows, like I have a verse highlighted a little bit further, part of verse 12, where it talks about spirit of whoredom, and just how
Mm-hmm.
how much we're like Gomer in Hosea, and just how much we basically run from the one that's chasing after us and wants us the most. And just shows God's faithful heart in the midst of being a whore spiritually, and he still chases after me.
Mm-hmm. And as we think about it and internalize this reality, it helps us to capture the heart of God and who we are and what we do to the heart of God, and how much he loves us and what that means for him. Patrick?
I was just wondering why he had to buy her back after she went out as a prostitute. He said, "I bought her for 15 shekels of silver and about a homer and a lethek of barley."
She had most likely gotten herself into a situation where she was now a slave. Yep. most likely. Yes, Carly.
The translation, like an alternate translation, I guess, for verse 4 in chapter 4, says in the ESV, let no one content and let none accuse, for with you is my contention, O priest. And then he goes on to talk about how the prophets will stumble and the people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. And I guess he's kind of putting the blame or putting the load of guilt on the priests and prophets because they haven't been teaching the people his law.
Mm-hmm. There is a big responsibility here put onto the leaders of the people. Yeah. Yep. That's very important in this passage. Thank you, Carly.
Two things I noticed. Number one is when we're talking about asking why they had to buy her back, which is, that's a story of the gospel right there. I never noticed that before. It costs something for the husband to buy back his bride. The other thing that I never realized is how scary it is for God to say, I'll ignore your children. I think I don't have kids and that freaks me out.
Yeah. Yeah, we will find here later that the word of the Lord comes that he has left them, that he has in a sense removed his presence from them. That's here shortly after this, I believe. Chapter 5, verse 6. When they go with their flocks and herds to seek the Lord, they will not find him. He has withdrawn himself from them. That's not what we want to hear. And we have a better covenant with the Lord than this. We are in the new covenant. And so, in a sense, we are able to take advantage of that or abuse that promise we have that the Lord is with us. But certainly, he removes his blessing and favor from people who live in rebellion. So, yes, that's an important theme. How about something else? Thank you, Caleb. Anything else? Yes, Jeremy.
Something got to me with verse 3. I think I heard something different from when you were speaking it out, but my version says that I told her that that was for a long time. She would have to wait for me with being a prostitute or also committing adultery, and that during this time I would have to wait for her. But I thought that the version that he spoke on was there was no waiting period. So is it waiting or is it they're leaving together? I'm not sure what that means. It just my two version says waiting for, and both of them are waiting for each other in verse 3 of chapter 3.
That's a good question, Jeremy. I don't know the answer to that. Would have to look at that. So the concept I get when I read here is that she needs to stay with him and not sleep with anyone else.
Yeah.
What version
That's
is
what I
that?
heard. Well, this was today's English version, but I also heard another version that had that said something similar to that waiting. That's NASB, I think.
Okay. You may be able to fit that in there a little bit in section 1, or because it's such a personal thing, obviously, such an intimate issue in their marriage, that really that could fit there anywhere, if you had a little bit there on what you found. So that'll give you something to run with there. Julie, I saw your hand.
Yeah. It was kind of a little bit off of what Patrick and Kayla were saying about just kind of that there was a price for her redemption, and that sometimes I don't think we think of like an actual like price, and that he had to actually physically go and buy her back.
Mhm.
And then thinking on that, what was going through her mind
Mhm.
of why are you taking me back? And what was her thought process?
Mhm.
Was she planning at that moment, yes, I'm going to stay with you, I'm not going to do this again? Or was she like, you're crazy,
Mhm.
what was going through her mind?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she sounds like the case of a love-starved heart. So, there's certain things that I would think that she would be overwhelmed by his faithfulness and love for her. But her heart, the love-starved heart, was so desperate and so easily moved other places. Mhm. Yes, Caleb.
Oh, well, I have this in chapter 3, verse 4. That is when God is like showing the things that of Israel that say in a New Living Translation say they show that Israel will go a long time without a king or priest and without sacrifice, sacred pillars, priests, or even idols. And the King James say without an ephod and without teraphim. So for me, this is a strong verse
Mm-hmm.
because it's something that God is showing, like He's accepting. Like I accept you have king, you have priest, you have sacrifices, you have sacred pillars, or even idols. I don't want to mean like I feel like we can have idols, but for people that is like new and reading this, it's like okay, God is agree with idols.
Right. It's like he's saying everything that is important to your religious life will be taken from you. And it's not, yeah, certainly someone could look right at that on the surface out of context and say, oh, he's condoning idols, but in the context it's so obvious.
Yeah.
But he's sort of coming down to their level to speak to them, say all the things that are important to you when you are taken away into exile will be taken from you. You will not be able to have a king over you. You will not be able to make your sacrifices and do the things you've been doing, good and bad, because of being in exile. Mm-hmm. And then obviously verse 5 is the purpose that the Lord has of taking that away from them, is that they would want to return to the Lord. Yes. Yes, Patrick.
Why is it that, because like everyone else that I can think of in the Bible, when God calls them, they might be going through a time of hardship or like something bad's happening to them or whatever. Like for example, Jonah, he goes through the whale and all that stuff. But in the end, it turns out like okay for them and they get like exalted and glorified in some way or whatever. But it seems that throughout, I can't really see anything good in Hosea's life like whatsoever. So like why would God call someone to a life of just misery and pain?
It's a great question, Patrick. And the Lord was with Hosea. That does not mean that it would make it not a painful thing for him to do and to be called to that. But part of our calling is to carry our cross. And you see pictures of this. This is a great picture of that in the Old Testament, where answering the call of God in a broken and fallen world includes suffering. And it's a part of God's redemptive plan and His way of meeting with people. But I think that the outcome of that is no. The calling of God does not always lead to. The calling of God does not always lead to joyous situations, like John the Baptist, whose obedience to speak as a prophet to Herod cost him his head, where he, as an obedient servant of the Lord, lost his head for it. He could have, if John the Baptist would have shut his mouth and not been negative and divisive in that way, so to speak. To say, King, you're not, you shouldn't do this. You shouldn't be sleeping with your brother's wife. If he would have just been quiet and not rocked the boat, he would have been okay. As far as saving his neck, literally. But he spoke up as a prophet of the Lord and lost his head. So it's the cross, Patrick. And ultimately, Jesus took it for us because of sin, and it's because of fallenness. And so that has to mix with our understanding of the calling of God. That he doesn't call us and want us to live miserable lives. But there will be pain and there will be sacrifice that's involved in answering the call of the Lord. But we have the Spirit of the Lord with us. And so he gives us joy and gives us peace that is apart from our circumstances. He gives us a comfort, Paul talks about. That's why the Spirit of the Lord is referred to as the Comforter with a capital C. And because he comforts us in our troubles and trials. And some of those troubles and trials are a direct result of the calling of God. And that's why we need to count the cost before we jump. And Jesus said before the story, he used the illustration of before someone goes to build their house, before they really know what it's going to cost and they leave it unfinished. And I know someone that did that with a mansion on a lake, on the hillside of one of the lakes near here. Started a mansion, didn't have the money to finish it, and it rotted out. And it was beautiful, and it rotted. So does that answer this question some? That's such a big, profound subject. And Gomer and Hosea is a great example of that. Carly.
Just thinking about, like, was there any good in Hosea's life? If the greatest good is to know God and to know his character, I think Hosea came away with that.
Mm-hmm.
If nothing else.
Nearness to the Lord.
Yeah, to know his love.
Yes. He had nearness to the Lord, and he knew his heart. Yep. Patrick.
We also the Bible only talks about the bad part of his marriage, but it doesn't really say what happens after they were reconciled. Like after this part where they come back together, so you have to wonder if there was a healing in that marriage as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because part of what Hosea talks about is a healing
Mm-hmm.
between Israelites and God.
Mm-hmm.
So there is that possibility there was a healing and a restoration in that marriage too.
Mm-hmm. There is. Yep. Yep. Okay. Good. That's great. I'm surprised no one asked about what are the sacred raisin cakes. What is that? And the funny thing for that is, what that was something that was used in Baal worship, a sacrifice. They would give sacred raisin cakes, and so the Lord was speaking to that. And then when I visited this church one time for the first time, as a new visitor, they gave you raisin cakes. So I was like, wait a second here. It was a southern area, and it was one of their hospitality things that they did. But whenever I read that, I always think of getting that raisin cake from that church, and they're wonderful people that are there. So, okay, so Hosea was from the northern kingdom, and he was there in the final days of the northern kingdom. That was the divided people of God. And he saw the victories and successes of Jeroboam II, who recovered most of the land that was lost to the Arameans, and brought in a sense of, I don't know if you could say peace, but a sense of renewal and restoration to their national, situation as the northern kingdom there. But his reign as king was followed quickly by his successors with wickedness and assassination after assassination of kings. Bloodshed after bloodshed. Not all of them, but most of them. And the Lord was angry with the situation, and with the kings, and with the conspiring of the people, and with the next leader having gained the throne by conspiring and assassinating the one before him. We get a little picture again of God's heart, and this is jumping ahead, but in chapter 13, 10 and 11, where is your king, that he may save you? Where are your rulers in all your towns, of whom you said, give me a king and princes? So in my anger I gave you a king, and in my wrath I took him away. And it's an ugly story that was in the northern kingdom here. And so we move along through assassinations to finally Hosea taking the throne and ruling from Samaria in the northern kingdom. And there was a building resistance against Assyria. And Hosea finally resists to the point that Assyria comes in and just slaughters and ends their ability to resist any longer, and overthrows Hosea and ends the reign, and there is no longer a northern kingdom in God's people. This was the end. Does anybody know about the way that some of what the Assyrians did when they would war against a city and lay siege to the city, and then what they would do when they got in? The Assyrians. Caleb.
They were the ones that started crucifying.
Mm-hmm.
Crucified, when they just nailed them to trees.
They would impale them and stick them up in the air, impaled on a pole, and they would take a whole bunch of heads, and they would pile heads at the city gate, a whole pile of people's heads. So you want to talk about intimidation to the people of the city that would say, okay, we belong to the Assyrians now. We don't want to resist them any longer. And so the Assyrians were brutal, and they came smashing in there on Samaria, and Hosea was the last king. So, and this is the setting that Hosea was in when he was ministering. His ministry lasted approximately 40 to 50 years, according to the dates around these kings that are named here in the situation. This is from Wood, about 40 to 50 years. And much of the book of Hosea in his ministry is based upon his marriage and his children. And you know this, but we want to talk about this. Before we jump into the names of his kids and their significance, I want to give you some of the themes that are in Hosea. Some of the themes of his preaching and ministry, his theology. Can any of you share some of the overarching themes of Hosea, already even from what we've talked about? What are some overarching themes that have already surfaced in Hosea? Yes, Joshua.
Israel's unfaithfulness to God.
Unfaithfulness to God. Yes.
Illustrated by Hosea's relationship with his wife.
Yes, that's one of the biggest themes. Yep. Unfaithfulness. Caleb.
God's jealousy.
Mm-hmm. Yes. His jealousy. Good. Good. I didn't have that one down. That's a great one. That's powerful. Themes. How about some more?
Israel's sin and impending judgment.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Sin and judgment. Very big. Mm-hmm.
Israel thinking their blessing comes from other gods or other things.
Yes. Yes. And part of that is unholy alliances. They were not only other gods, but looking to other nations, which ended up being their end. Unholy alliances and unholy worship, for sure. There's also a theme here once you know the history there of Jeroboam and his successes. Jeroboam II. of the dangers of prosperity that come when God's people are in good times. And maybe you could say it was good times for them. Not totally. But when things seem to be going well, and there is prosperity, the tendency there is that people's hearts wander from the Lord. And this was in their situation. Any others? Also, the theme, it's very important, is repentance, the calling and the opportunity of repentance, turning and changing, and the promise of God for restoration. And finally, the ultimate outcome and the theme of Hosea is the faithful love and compassion of God. Despite their sin and their wickedness and their unfaithfulness, God will not let Israel go forever, because he has made a covenant with them and he loves them. He's chosen them. The faithful love of God. Just to give you an ABC outline of Hosea that I'm working from here, the first part of Hosea is the story and significance of Hosea's marriage and children. So you could just put Hosea's marriage and children, and that's chapters 1 through 3. And number 2 is the indictment of Israel's sin and judgment. And that's chapters 4 through 10. This could be broken down into smaller parts, and Wood has it very broken down there, but I'm just giving you the outline I'm working from. The story of their marriage and children, indictment of Israel's sin and judgment. And then number 3, the faithful love of God and restoration of Israel, which is chapters 11 through 14. Leviticus 21:7 and 13 and 15. Let me read this to you. We're moving away from Hosea to Leviticus. This is Leviticus 21:7 and 13 to 15. Speaking about a priest. They must not marry women defiled by prostitution or divorced from their husbands, because priests are holy to their God. The woman he marries must be a virgin. He must not marry a widow, a divorced woman, or a woman defiled by prostitution, but only a virgin from his own people. So he will not defile his offspring among his people. I am the Lord who makes him holy. So when we think about Hosea's marriage to Gomer, the question is, when we look at the function of a prophet, and we can bring Wood in on this, was his marriage an object lesson? Remember the functions of a prophet and the things that they did? Was it something that became a prophetic message later, as he observed, you could say, more than observed, but as the unfaithfulness began to happen in his marriage, and the Lord began to speak through it? That would be an object lesson, where the Lord says to the prophet, look at this. What you see here is a message. Or was it a symbolic action? Remember the difference between those two? Object lesson is something that the prophet is observing going on, and the Lord begins to speak to the prophet. And they are to communicate God's message through that thing going on. And then a symbolic action is something that the prophet does on purpose to communicate a message. And this helps us wrestle. You're getting it there, Tom. Did Hosea receive a calling from the Lord on purpose to marry knowingly a prostitute? Or knowingly that she would become a prostitute as a symbol of God's relationship to Israel? That he knowingly chose a people who would be unfaithful to him? Or was it something that as it began to happen, for Hosea that it became a message, which is an object lesson. James?
It seems symbolic, because he told him, like near the beginning, before it happened, that it would happen.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't seem like it's something that surprised Hosea. He's
Mm-hmm.
like, the heck did you do that for? It's
Mm-hmm.
probably something that he's like, it still hurts, like, but he was kind of expecting it at some point. It seems symbolic,
Yeah.
because he knew.
Okay, thank you. Because of what we get from the text. You're basing that right on the text, not just on Leviticus and the law of God and wood or others, but right from the text. It says, go and marry. Well, really, when you read the text there, it's pretty clear. So, yes, Caleb.
But like a counter argument to that would be, I mean, a lot of times the prophets would write their books later.
Mm-hmm.
So he could have been, right, like, I think what Wood was saying was that, he may marry this girl and then it turned into an object lesson later.
Mm-hmm.
And then when Hosea wrote his book, it would have been like, he would have seen God's work throughout it, saying, I'm gonna do this later in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And it became an object lesson, because I don't know how a guy would wanna marry a prostitute girl.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when it would completely destroy his reputation and ministry.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. We got the two sides of the two views right there from two people who are friends, and that's great. So this is important. Wood says, and basing it on other scholars, that if he were to knowingly marry someone who already was a prostitute, it would be in a violation of Leviticus, the Levitical law, and would have ruined his ability to be respected in his prophetic ministry.
Yeah.
Okay, so based on that, he says, no, he did not marry knowingly someone, at least she had not already been unfaithful. Joshua?
Was he a priest? Because it says a priest can't do that, but if
Right.
the priests had a lot of regulations, the people didn't. The kings had regulations, the people didn't.
Right.
And Jesus came in a way that everyone thought that he was born out of adultery and out of wedlock, and they asked him where his mother, like,
Mm-hmm.
so Jesus came in a way that destroyed his credibility. So to ask someone else to do something like that, as long, what I mean, like,
Right.
there's not.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Can I ask what passage in Leviticus that was?
Yes.
I didn't catch that.
Leviticus 21, 7, verse 7, and verses 13 to 15. Okay, so what I would say is the starting point is to look at what the Lord says to the way that Hosea or whoever wrote this, the way it was communicated there in the beginning of Hosea 1. We want to look at that, and we would want to understand the language there, the concepts. Like here in my NIV, I'm getting the dynamic concept of what the language says in Hebrew. The NASB would have a more literal there. And so we're wanting to answer the question, first of all, we don't have to answer it right now. Did he know when he married her that she was going to be unfaithful? And did he already know that this was a prophetic call on his life, and this was how the Lord was going to communicate the message? And the other question is, had she already been making it obvious that he was knowingly marrying someone who was a prostitute? Or did he find it out later, after they were married, and she became unfaithful to him, and the Lord began to speak to him through it, which would be the object lesson, the style of the function of a prophet there. Okay, Caleb.
Even, like, to fully emphasize the point of God's heart in this, like, I mean, if God called him, like, if he knew what he was getting into, as a human, I don't think he could have fully conveyed God's heart, because it's like, okay, well, in 90 days, she's gonna cheat on me, so I'll just sit it out and wait, and then, okay, well, then that happened, I guess I'll go buy her back now. I don't think that would have I don't think Hosea could have conveyed the point, because I don't think he would have been speaking out of brokenness, because it would have been an expectant thing. I know God fully knows, the future, so he knew what he was getting into, but I don't think a human could have conveyed God's heart in that way if he would have known. Does that make sense?
Would it be necessary for him to convey it with his own words or emotions? Or would the action itself convey it by his own humiliation? If he knowingly took a prostitute, that would be so like, the tabloids. Whoa, regardless of how he responded to it. Just doing it would be a shocker.
Well, kind of in like response to what Josh said, that Jesus did come in a way that was uncredible, but that wasn't his action, like that wasn't his choice. If a guy comes up to me and tries speaking into my life and I know that he married a prostitute, there would be that question like, I don't really respect you, because like by your actions you look like you're an idiot.
If he cooks food over poop. I said, what if he cooks food over poop?
That's
Like,
different.
like Josh was saying,
Uh-huh.
Hosea was not a priest, correct? He was a prophet.
Right, yeah. I have never heard that he was a priest. Boy, that would be a find if we suddenly realized, okay, and this is just something that I've missed in reading and haven't paid attention to about Hosea.
Isn't those passages in Leviticus, don't those just talk about the priest?
That one is specifically for priests, yeah.
Where would it be a violation of the law for him to marry a prostitute then? If it was a violation for a priest,
Mm-hmm.
but if Hosea is not a priest, like Josh was saying, then it wouldn't have been a violation of the law for him to knowingly marry a
Well,
prostitute.
I don't think it's a
correct?
violation of the law, it's just dumb.
But what,
But coming as a,
if Wood was saying that it was a violation of the law,
Mm-hmm.
that's why I'm asking, like, where would it have been wrong for him?
Okay, so what, would he be held to the same standard?
you're saying
Yeah.
it's not a
Okay.
moral issue.
Zion.
Don't you think that it would show how big of a heart God had for someone to knowingly go into a situation like marrying someone who's a prostitute, knowing that they're gonna cheat on you, knowing they're gonna be unfaithful to you, but you still chose to marry them, knowing that you're gonna have to buy them back out of slavery because they're gonna get themselves into situations that are inappropriate or get themselves in like shameful places, but you know you're bringing that shame upon yourself and still you choose to love them anyways.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that shows how big God's heart is,
Mm-hmm.
even if he did know.
Okay, thank you. All right, so that's a question we have. Carly, you had your hand up there.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, the Amplified version and the Message is interesting. The Amplified says, take a wife of harlotry, or something like that, like she's already, and the Message says, find a whore and marry her.
Mm-hmm.
Like, pretty, go, someone who's doing it right now.
Okay, that is important. What does the original call
Yeah.
that is communicated to us here in the text, what does it say? And if we take it literally, that the way it says it here is the way that it's meant. That's important to how we interpret that. Okay, so let's leave that part there. Thank you, Carly. Let's talk about Hosea's children. His first child is conceived between Hosea and Gomer, and the Lord says, name him Jezreel. His first child is a message of God's disapproval and coming judgment, punishment upon the northern kingdom, ultimately because of the excessive, because of the sin of excess, you could say, and I'm interpreting there, of what Jehu had done. When he set up when he began the dynasty in the northern kingdom, Jehu's line. Jezreel, he was named after the sin of excess. When Jehu went in and was fulfilling prophecy by killing off some wicked leaders. He sought to completely obliterate the leaders. He almost wiped out the house of David, almost completely. And it's not answered fully in the story, but the question is, was he, when he went in and was as a fulfillment of prophecy, was he to kill all of the descendants? Part of it is in 2 Kings 8 and 9. He killed Ahaziah and Joram. He almost completely wiped out the line of Judah, the house of David. And the Lord is announcing his punishment on Jehu's line in the northern kingdom because of that sin. Okay, the second child, a daughter, Lo Ruhamah. Okay, we can just say here for that purpose, if you want to say the girl's name, you can say Lo Ruhamah, just so that we can continue conversing. Okay, his the second child was not conceived by Hosea. Their second child was not their child. She was born from Gomer's prostitution, an unknown father. Okay, we are heaping, Patrick, your question about why would the Lord do that, this is heaping on that pile of pain. She is unfaithful, and now she has conceived a child from an unknown man and brought this into their home, brought this into their marriage. And the Lord says to Hosea, name that child. The meaning of it is not loved. Not loved. And it is a symbol of the woundedness and the anger in the heart of God that caused him to remove his loving compassion from his people. Through the woundedness and the anger in Hosea's heart that would cause him to not have that kind of compassionate love for this child because it's a child of prostitution. Joshua.
How do we know that it was a child of prostitution? Just because it says that it doesn't say that bore him a son, as it did with Jezreel.
Yeah, that's the first one. But the name points to that I'm not giving you my compassionate love. That's a good and fair question, Joshua. We have later in Hosea the mention of having children that are children of prostitution. So we have the multiple there. Verse 5, chapter 2, verse 5, 4 and 5. I will not show my love to her children because they are the children of adultery. So we get plural there. And that's another reason that there would be more than just the third one. So the second one. Okay, good question though. That's how we dig. We dig and say, wait a minute here, how do we know this? Okay. He is removing his loving compassion and his presence from the northern kingdom. Okay, the third child, Lo Ami, is a boy, and it is conceived in prostitution. And the name is very clear on that. You are not my people. The name means not my people. And it was a message. Hosea was to name this child as a message from God about their turning away from him and worshiping Baal and being a people who conceive and carry apart from the Lord. Okay, and then at the end here of chapter 1, we've been in other places and we're back here at 1. We get the promise of the Lord in verses 10 to 11. This is what keeps coming through in Hosea constantly. that he will restore. His promise is that he will restore. Then in chapter 2, the first 13 verses, the condemnation for this sin is announced. But then again, in the second half of chapter 2, are the promises of God to restore his people. And Hosea acts this out. This time we know it's a symbolic action. In chapter 3, by taking Hosea back, knowingly going to her who has been unfaithful and buying her back, and it is the message from the Lord that despite all of the unfaithfulness of Israel, he is going to take her back and show his faithful love and compassion to her. Hosea repeatedly brings the message of God's promise of restoration in the midst of rebellion and unfaithfulness. Hosea constantly goes back to the faithful love of God. And let's stop there for today. Blessings upon you.